Written by Murphy here, back with another book review. This is a review of The Travels of Marco Polo, also Il Milione. This was published in 1298. It was written by Rustichello de Pisa, also known, and Marco Polo. This is kind of a collaboration that they did. Rustichello de Pisa was known for writing the first romance of King Arthur in the Italian language. King Arthur was mostly a French thing at this point. And Rustichello de Pisa and Marco Polo were in prison together, and this is how Rustichello heard a lot of the stories of his travels. He was already a romance author, and so he was like, I think I could make a book out of this. Good for him. The book consists of a prologue and 4 sections, which he calls books. So book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4. They recall the extensive travels starting from Venice and going, I swear, not quite to the eastern coast of Asia, but tales of all this area, like all over. Through like the Middle East, China, India, Turkey, even Russia. Now, this book, I always like to think about a book in what it was like for the people that were reading it contemporarily. What was happening at the time? I said Arthurian legends were popular. This was a French thing. The Icelandic Eddas were happening. And also the Catholic Church. Huge influence on the writing of the time. The church this was the same century that Francis of Assisi was doing his thing, and Thomas Aquinas, still very influential writers. Dante Alighieri, did not write his Divine Comedy until 20 years later, so he was likely at least a little bit, influenced. I'm sure he read this story. This is what I might call the darkest of the Dark Ages, right? This was way deep, but I think it's about to get lighter right at this moment. So let me tell you about Marco Polo. The prologue tells the story of his family. His father and his uncle were already in Niccolo Polo, what a name, right? And Maffeo were already in the court of Kubla Khan, who was in Asia. They were serving him. They had a trade business, so they were already over there in the service of Kubla Khan. But Kubla Khan was, he's like, I like you guys, but you know what? They like begged him, can we wanna? So Kubla Khan said, I think I should write a letter to the Pope. So he wanted to send a message to the Pope to give greetings to the Pope. So he said, get a Pope, send this message and a gift, and then get the message back from the Pope to create this alliance. Wouldn't it be great to have that alliance? So they head off. Yay, we're going to go back home and see the message from Kubla Khan. Unfortunately, right as they came, the Pope had died. Ooh. So they had to wait for a new pope to be elected. So they hung out waiting for the new pope to be elected. That's the sort of thing that should happen pretty quick, right? Well, it turns out it took 2 years before they went, we can't get our message back to Kubla Khan. So they took a moment and went back home because the Pope was not where they were from. They went back to Venice. No, not. I'm sorry, I'm not clear on this. When they went to where their family was, Niccolo Polo had left his wife in a pregnant state. He came back, and she had passed away. Very sad. But the baby had not. The baby was still around. And that baby was Marco Polo. But that baby was 19 years old. Wow! You send your husband off, and he comes back 19 years later? I don't know. I guess travel was pretty hard. I also find it interesting that they waited 2 years before they went up to where their home was. Like, couldn't they, like, come back later? No, they were not in a hurry to get home. So this says something about their family values. All right. That still amazes me. Travel was very difficult, apparently. All right. So they did go back to the Pope. They brought Marco with them. Now Marco's like, hey, Dad, I never met you. Let's go on a trip. So they go back to the Pope, give their message to the Pope. The Pope is like, ooh, yeah, let's be friends. So the Pope sends back a big bunch of message to Kubla Khan. So now they got to go all the way back to Kubla Khan. They bring the son with and have a lot of adventures. That was the prologue. The book as a whole is very detailed and specific. He names the names of cities, the types of foods and the goods that they make, some of their customs. He's talking about what the people are like, what they have. And he names like recipes of the sorts of things that they do. Well, they drink this kind of food. They drink this kind of drink, this kind of wine. They like this kind of food. He talks about the animals they keep and that they eat. Very, very specific. In a way, I thought it sounded a bit like you might find in Frommer's. I'm telling you, this is a good travel guide, such as it is. Not like I would expect from the Arthurian tales. The Arthurian legends are not at all that specific. They are like very magical, and they are not something that you could recreate. But this stuff, I felt like I was there. More than I would have expected from a 13th century book. He's very specific. He even says, this is how many days it takes to travel between cities. You go for this city ends, and then you go 4 days, and you're here at this next city. All right. Religion is mentioned constantly. There are, he calls them Mohammedans and Saracens, which now we would say are Islam or Muslim. He mentions Nestorian Christians. And then he says the idolaters. I don't know what makes certain people idolaters. In any case, this is he has a very strong sense of the religion that's happening. Very occasionally, he mentions Jews. I'm like, well, Jews are around too. All right, so book 1, he talks about, among other places, Armenia, that general area of the Middle East. Book 2, he talks about the territory of Kubla Khan. Book 3 is China, which he calls Cathay and Manji. And book 4 is Turkey and Russia. The biggest description is book 2. Book 2 is the longest. All right, so we talk about book 1. Marco Polo is on Team Christian. That is the religion of him. That's where he's going with. And one of the early parts of book 1 of them walking around in Armenia, they have a Christian miracle. And I thought, okay, this is familiar. This is familiar. Like when I'm talking about medieval literature, this is what I might expect to see. He did have, there was a conflict between some Christians and a Mohammedan ruler, and the Mohammedan ruler's like, you have to do what I want. And the Christian's like, no, we want to believe our own Christian. And he said, let's have a sort of a god off, right? Which one gets to win? And they found a very strong Christian who took the commandment that if your right eye offends you, it's better to pluck it out. So one time he had a lustful thought about a woman, so he plucked his eye out right away. So like, that's the guy who's super faithful. So they had a god off, and they had said, if your God is the biggest God, he will move the mountain. So they all prayed, and this guy who is so Christian, he plucked his own eye out, actually did move the mountain in this story. I'm like, okay, well, this is I would call that in the realm of miraculous or magical. So, all right. But the rest of the story was not in that tone. It was a lot more practical. These type of animals, this type of food, these type of goods that you can buy. So I was kind of expecting to see a lot of crazy stories. So that was one a little bit crazy story about moving a mountain as a proof of the religion superiority. They did have one crazy story of in book one of what I would call a religious sex cult. Shocking. There was a particular religion that believed that they any guests that came should have access to all their women. Well, that is a good an attractive thing for travelers, I guess. So that happened. So book one, a lot of description, and we're just kind of getting warmed up. At the very end of book one, he has us enter the city of Kubla Khan. I was a little bit surprised at the shocking change at the end of book one because now he starts talking about architecture. We had not talked about architecture before that. I'm like, oh, now we're talking about architecture. Book two, the realm of Kubla Khan. Now he says Genghis Khan is the most famous Khan, right? And Kubla Khan is like the sixth after Genghis. So he's like, he's the best Khan because he got all the best things of the Khans that came before. And also he's your ruler guy. He's the one you're connected to. Now, just to introduce Kubla Khan himself, remember, religion's important to this guy. According to Marco Polo in this book, Kubla Khan is like very chill. He's like open and very accommodating to the different religions. He's got a lot of religions in his realm. So he's like, well, I respect each of you. And Marco's like, yeah, but he probably wanted to be a Christian. He was very Christian. He was like, but he couldn't really commit to being a Christian because he had to be open, but he was really very Christian. So Marco Polo, Team Christian, he was saying to his readers back in Italy and Europe, he's like almost a Christian guy. If only just one little push and he'd be a Christian, right? Okay, fine. Now, this section, book two, is describing the administration of this empire. This is a huge empire. And it takes a lot of administration, a lot of systems for this to work. There are a ton of clerks. There is a the grandeur of how all the different regions bring to the Khan their tribute. They say, oh, the Khan has to have 9 times 9 of any object you want to give him. So if you want to give him a horse, you better bring 9 times 9, like 81 horses. So, and they all have to be the same. It's best if they're white. And anything you want to give him has to be 9 times 9. So that's a lot of stuff. Okay. And then you have to store all this stuff. So there's clerks tracking everything. They use paper money. This is a big deal. Paper money is not common, certainly not in Europe. So the fact that they have so much wealth, they can't even carry the heavy coins around. They use paper money, and paper money is used anywhere in Khan's realm, which is so large that it's okay. Interestingly, they also talk about the social welfare. Now, he takes tribute from all the places that are part of his realm, but it says he's kind. Marco Polo says he's kind, and if there's one region that has had like a fire or bad weather so they don't have enough water for their crops and they can't give it, he forgives them and he makes sure that he brings them some food so that they don't suffer. That's really nice. I don't think I've heard of that formally done. Now, this could be overstating it. I don't know, Marco Polo, but he's telling the story about how the Khan is very generous and kind. This is nice. Okay, we move out of kind of this Western Asia and a little bit further into China. Actually, they mention that eunuchs are part of their culture. I don't think this came up before, but when they came to China, they say there are a lot of eunuchs, and eunuchs are used in certain ways in their society. Okay. Oh, I forgot. Cannibalism is mentioned. Cannibalism comes up. That's creepy. That's gross. So, like how the people eat each other at certain times and the circumstances they will, the different religious. It happened also in the first book 1 too. So there is cannibalism going on, just to be creepy. In book 2, they do get to the celestial city, and there is a lot more about the architecture here. The celestial city in China is described as beautiful, very respected, and there's a great culture happening. So this is something that the Khans took over, and they recognized that this was culture and society that they were conquering, but they still respected it. Book 3 is India. There are a few more outlandish tales here. In India, they do mention men with tails like dogs. There was a certain section in the mountains where there were men with tails like dogs, human beings with tails. I'm like, wow. That's right. Also, in a little side part, he mentions Madagascar. He says there's this enormous bird called a rook. And I've heard of a rook. I thought a rook was just a kind of a crow. But in this magical tale, the rook is this like 10 times, even more than 10 times size of an eagle, and it's black. And it's this enormous bird that can pick up an elephant with its talons. What? Oh, that's way bigger than 10 times an eagle. Pick up an elephant with its talons, and it's like freaky. And they said they've had a feather that they gave to a king, and it's like, yeah, this is the feather of the rook. Now, he didn't see it, right? So he just heard tales of it. India, China too, but India has a lot of spices. They've got so many spices. They've got ginger, they've got pepper, they've got all these kinds of crazy spices. So many spices, they can't even store it all. I betcha Christopher Columbus was very inspired by the stories of all these precious, precious spices. There was an overproduction. They just made it, the stuff grew like crazy, and they had all the spices that they need. Book 4 is Turkey, and they do even nip up into Russia. This book had a lot more stories of battles. There were some stories of battles in the other books, but this one just had some gorgeous stories of battles. One story I loved was the story of the princess. The princess who was hugely strong and kept herself in major shape. She extracted a promise from her king father, and said, "You must let me choose my husband. I will marry the man who will beat me in wrestling." So, the word went out. You want this princess? Here's the price. Bring 10 horses and you can wrestle her and win her hand in marriage. See, check out this story. So people kept coming, and no one could beat her. No one could beat her. Eventually, and so she didn't marry, as far as this story goes. So eventually her father said, okay, fine, just come with me in battle. And that was her story. She won every match. We come to the end of this very long description book. You can go online and look and see like maps where people have come up with what they think are the travels of Marco Polo. They're incredibly extensive. He went all the way there and back. This story, as I was saying, I think it's the end of the Dark Ages. I think this book really marks a change. And I have the opinion that I've just formed after reading it, that this is the first real book of the Renaissance, because this has a feel to it. I feel like I could go recreate what just happened. Like, okay, if I go over here, I will find this city and it will be prepared. And some of the stories too, he talks about crossing a desert. He's like, you will cross this desert. You're going to need to take this kind of water. And then there's going to be an oasis at this place. So it really felt real, different from the Arthurian legends, which were all set in a magical, mystical world that you couldn't recreate. You probably couldn't even discover because it was some other world. But this book was rooted in reality. As crazy as it was, and as I thought there were going to be a lot more impossible stories, it did not feel that way at all. It felt like, this is what you eat. This is what you drink. These are what the people are like. These are what the customs are. So this is really an extraordinary book. In a world at that time where there weren't that many books. There weren't that many. I just read you like the list of early books that people were reading. These are the stories. I'm sure that as soon as somebody heard one of these stories, they repeated it to everybody they knew. Because they're so compelling. Like, yeah, let me tell you, it's kind of like a treasure map. It's exactly like a treasure map. Very realistic. And Marco Polo and his buddy, Rustichello di Pisa, who mostly wrote romance stories, came up with this book, rooted in reality, that people are still talking about. They're still talking about it. There's probably a movie running right now on one of the thousands of channels on cable that has Marco Polo as a hero, and that doesn't even come up to the part where the kids still play Marco Polo by hiding in the swimming pools. Very influential book. Changed Western culture for sure, and I think by inference changed Eastern culture too, because over here in the West, where we all read this book, or at least know somebody that read this book, heard a retelling of it, is how we viewed these other places, the Eastern side of the world. I love this book. I'm really glad I read it. One of the great history changers, game changers for the whole history of the world and how we see one another.